Thank you, Calvin. So, good morning once again, or good day, depending on where you are in this part of the world. So, again, just to recap, the webinar objectives is basically to provide awareness of what business continuity management is all about, or how do you go about it, what are the key deliverables, and how do you establish a business continuity management system. And those are the things we are going to be doing today. Like Kevin said, if you have any questions on any slide and so on, just please send them through the chat page, the comment section, comment page of the slide, and then we'll take it later on. So my outline for today is I would introduce business continuity to you, and there are various names that people call business continuity: contingency planning, disaster recovery, and we'll narrow down to say this is what we mean as business continuity. We'll go through requirements. How do you gather requirements for the company or for when you are trying to plan for continuity? We would also then discuss how do you determine the strategy that a company should choose. And once we do that, we now start to discuss how we create the different documents which we call business continuity plans and recovery procedures. And then how do we prepare to execute all these plans? Meaning we are going to be exercising and testing all the plans and all the technology systems that we have put together. And we'll also go through training and awareness, exercising and invocation, and then we'll wrap up with a guide as to how do we then establish a business continuity management system based on ISO 22301 2012 international standard. Okay, so introduction. I think the starting point is to define business continuity planning. Based on what you can see on the slide, it says developing, maintaining, implementing procedures to recover and restore business operations after an extended disruption. Now, the question is, what is an extended disruption? This is something that every organization must define. You have to define whether if you have a crash and some of your users can't log in for 2 hours or for 1 hour, that is considered as extended. Those are the things you have to determine when you are preparing or gathering requirements for continuity. But the way we define continuity planning is using the Public Safety Canada, a guide to business continuity planning definition. It says it's a proactive planning process that ensures critical services or products are delivered during a disruption, meaning that you have to have done some work. Proactive means we have done some work before the issue occurs. So if we fail to do some work now and really hoping that a disaster will not occur, then we are kidding ourselves. Then we need to, we've really not remember everything that's happened in the whole world. Like Kevin said, there's global warming. And we recall of recent events even that happened to British Airways, or whereby they had to cancel all their flights for an entire day. So all these things do happen. So it's not about will it happen, it's about when will it happen. So it's our job to ensure that we have planned for a disaster and we are able to restore services when a disaster occurs. So typically the objectives for doing business continuity planning includes you want to ensure that the company can continue into a foreseeable future. Now, accountants will say that there's a business is going concern. The question is, what does going concern mean? A business cannot be going concern if you don't have a plan. You only say that this business would go on for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 100 years, and 200 years if there's a plan. And that plan will include succession planning, will include so many other plans. So this is one of the objectives of business continuity planning. Another key objective is avoiding injuries to people, to personnel, avoiding financial losses. We know the amount of money or companies lose when disasters occur. We know the amount of the damage, apart from the fact that people died even during 9/11. So we are aware of all this. There are damages to assets, and we could also lose market share because our customers have choices. It's either when they come to us, we have a disaster, and they empathize with us. They want to see that we can come back up quickly, but where we can't, in a few days, it could be in 1 day, 2 days, or 1 week, what would they do? They move on. Another objective is we want to conform with laws and regulatory requirements. Depending on the industries you work in, telecommunication, for example, in Canada, there's a Telecommunication Act of 1993 that regulates how the telecom business is run. And I'm very sure in other parts of the world, there are also such laws. In Africa, like in Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria also provides strict regulations for the financial industry. So depending on where you are, you have to understand the laws governing your operations. Now, for a public limited liability company, there is always this law that says you must have continuity planning. You must have done continuity planning. So as a PLC company or as an incorporated company or a company with more than 50 shareholders, you might be entitled to or required to prepare continuity plans. So that is one of the things you have to check as an organization. And one of the other things is we want to assess the risk to our business and then ensure that we cover for it. Now, the last thing here says we want to use it as a marketing tool. There was a story that there were two companies that were bidding for, this is a true life story, bidding for a business, and almost identical, their proposal, pricing and everything, they were almost identical. And what did they use? What did the client use to determine who should get the job? They requested for who has a business continuity plan, who will be there in 5 years, who will be there in 10 years to support their operations. And so that then defined who got the job. So moving on, so the question then is, what is the scope? What should business continuity planning cover? Pretty much, it should cover whatever you think is important to you. Whatever the business defines as important to you. And one of the things we would do later on is we would try and determine what we call your critical business processes. So again, scope can include employees, critical machines and equipment, office accommodations, or documentation, and all your IT stuff, all your voice and data communication infrastructure stuff, critical records, and so on. So what makes a company start a continuity planning process? In my world, of some of the places I've worked for, what really triggered us for starting continuity planning has always been that either an external auditor has made several recommendations to us to say you need a continuity plan. And so with those recommendations, we carry it, we look at them year on year, and then we start to do something about it. So that's one, usually because there are recommendations from both internal and external auditors. It could also be a stipulation from a regulatory body, because you have regulatory bodies worldwide that says that all publicly limited liability companies must have continuity plans, must have succession planning in place. In addition, your shareholders might want to protect their investment, because at the end of the day, if the company goes under, the shares of the company goes with it. So the company might want to protect their investment in your company by ensuring that management prepares continuity plans. Lastly, it could be because something has happened to your competitor, and so you want to protect yourself from letting that happen to you. So these are some of the things that could have happened that makes people say they want to do business continuity planning. So there are a few studies and statistics out there. So two that jumped at me. This one was a long time ago, where the London Chamber of Commerce did a survey in UK and came up with some of these conclusions. And it would amaze you to realize that 90% of businesses that lose their data from a disaster are forced to close down within 2 years. The question is, do we want that to be part of us? And another important information, it says 50% of companies that experience a computer crash are forced to close down within 5 years. Because once you lose everything IT and your business is dependent by IT, then almost everything is gone. Now, another one that really jumped at me is the Business Continuity Institute horizontal scan, the one that they've just done. They did this survey in October, between October and December last year. And some of the top 10 threats that they've been reporting on year in, year out, these are some of the top 10. I mean, the first three continue to be the first three for the last few years. For example, number one continues to be cyber attack. We know what happened with the US election, or we've been hearing it. Maybe we don't know what happened. We've been hearing it. There's a lot of information out there that is saying that maybe Russian act into that election. We don't know what happened, but we know that some hackers act into so many of the political organs in the US during that election. And so these are the things we need to plan for as part of continuity planning. Number two says data breach. Number three says unplanned IT and telecom outages. Unplanned IT, I just mentioned the British Airways example. There are many other examples. So we need to ensure that we are ready for all these things. Now, moving on to what are those 10 disruptions that also are important that happened that are the outcome of the survey. The number one is unplanned IT and telecom outages. The one, just as an example I gave. Now, in some parts of the world, adverse weather, and it's actually going to every part of the world now because of the global warming, it's also becoming important that we need to watch out for. Interruption to utility supply, and then one of the things that came in is new laws or regulations. It's coming to the 10th position for the very first time. So, what are the benefits for doing continuity planning? One of the benefits, your business can continue to foreseeable future. You are able to ensure that you can resume operations after a disaster has occurred, and also help you lower your insurance premiums. Because if your insurance agents or brokers realize that you have plans, you've done everything you need to do, you've assessed your risks and so on, then they can then realize that the chances or the likelihood or the probability of the risk occurring with your business is quite low. And so they can reward you for that by making you pay very, very small premiums. So the question then is, what is our approach for continuity planning? In 2008, Procept decided to go into business continuity planning practice. And so we hired experts in that field, and I worked with the experts to create this approach. And it starts from, we would initiate business continuity planning as a project, meaning we would establish policies, we would define scope, would establish objectives, and so on. And at times, we will also assess what is in place. So part of that assessment might be you are conducting assessments of whether a company has already done some planning work before. So we do this as part of initiation. And then we create a project plan, because at the end of the day, it's a project. We need to work on it as a project so that we can achieve the project objectives. And the next three things we do is we gather requirements for, we gather continuity requirements. Basically, we will be doing what we call business impact analysis, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. We'll talk about, we'll also do risk assessment, and we'll also, based on the outcome of these two, we will define the continuity strategy for the business. Now, I'm still going to talk about all this later on. And once we define the continuity strategies, what do we then do? We then create continuity plans. We start by looking at the responses. How do we respond to the disaster when it occurs? And then how do we recover the different business processes after the responses? And once we have created the plans, we then test the plans or exercise the plans depending on whether it's involving human people or it's involving those technology. And then the next thing we then do is we start to maintain disaster readiness, meaning we are waiting for the disaster to occur. Before disaster occurs, we would continue to teach people or educate people on what have we put in place within the company, what's our own definition of a disaster, and how should an employee, a staff respond once they see a disaster or once they hear of a disaster. Those are regularly from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. Then we will then also be regularly doing testing and exercising of our plans to ensure that the plan is ready, especially when there are major implementations within the system. So the last thing we do is invocation when the disaster occurs. So this is the life cycle that we have established for continuity planning. So let me quickly take us through a few of these before I round up. The very first one that we are going to be talking about is business impact analysis. And what this means is that what is the impact on our business processes, on our business services and products when a disaster occurs. So you see my screen now, it says, let's assume we're doing normal operation, and then we are taking our backups regularly, maybe once a day or 5 times a day or whatever, and then a disaster occurs. When a disaster occurs, then the question, we have a maximum amount of time, maybe 24 hours, to restore services before we can begin normal operation. But our RTO could be 2 hours, meaning that we must restore services up, the business processes up within 2 hours. And then we have another 22 hours to catch up. During the period when the services or the business processes are not available, we are accumulating backlog. And then later on, we are catching up basically. So during this period, business processes, we are doing emergency operations or when the services are out. And when the services are restored or processes are restored, we are now trying to catch up, doing both normal operation and providing workaround kind of operations before normal operations can begin. For IT, during the period when the services are not available, that means that IT service will not be available during that period also. And then later on, when IT is available, we can then ensure that we can restore all the backlog and so on and begin normal operation. So pretty much this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to determine the impact to us when we lose a service or when we lose a business process. And the impact could be severe by this curve that you see. It could be severe, it could be immediate, and the impact could also be, or maybe the long term, meaning that even when disaster occurs, it might take a few days before our customers start to notice the impact. So depending on what situation we find ourselves in our businesses, that then defines what we do. If we see that we have, as soon as a disaster occurs, there's an immediate impact, then what this is saying is that we need to indirectly do risk reduction. We need to try as much as possible to prevent disasters from occurring. However, if it will take time for the disaster to, let's say, impact our businesses, impact our customers, and so on, then what we might need to put in place is recovery options. Those are the things we need to put in place. So it really depends on what is the situation we find ourselves in. So I won't bore you with these steps. So these are the things we do in order to do our business impact analysis. There are 9 steps. It starts from understanding the objectives for business impact analysis, and it ends with identifying critical business processes and critical IT services, including we need to also determine recovery requirements such as recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives, or maximum tolerable downtime. These are things that we need to be able to feed into strategy definition. So one of the things we also need to do as part of our requirements gathering is we need to assess risk. We know that a risk may or may not happen, but when a risk occurs, it could bring about negative consequences. And this is why, as a business, we need to identify, assess, and manage risk. So we also have an approach to doing that as part of our continuity planning process, whereby we identify risk, we assess the risk, or the threat levels, and there's a distinction between threat and vulnerability. So a threat is pretty much those things that could bring about an asset not to function. So for example, flood will be a threat. Another example is fire. Fire is a threat. Fire is not a risk, but it's a threat. The question then is, how vulnerable is the asset to that threat? That is what we would then need to assess. Once we assess this, we then determine what we call risk levels. And based on the risk level, we determine what we need to do to these risks. And that's part of our risk assessment. So moving on to strategy, once we have done our business impact analysis and we have done our risk assessment, what we now need to do is define strategy. So again, this is our approach for defining strategy. So we would recall the earlier slide that basically shows the different types of impact, whether it is an immediate impact, and I could quickly go back to that, this slide, whether it's an immediate impact or whether it's a protracted impact, that is a prolonged impact. The impact doesn't show almost immediately. So, and depending on that, we would start by identifying risk reduction options, meaning what are those things we could do to manage the risk. And we've identified basic ones here. We have said we could accept the risk, we could transfer the risk, we could avoid the risk, and we could reduce the probability and impact of the risk occurring. Transferring means we want to bring in a third party who can help us manage the risk. For example, we can take insurance premiums. So if the disaster does occur, we would be able to fall back on insurance to recover some of our losses. But remember, the business is gone. You can't make future incomes from the business that is gone. Another recovery or risk reduction option is avoid. If there are things we could prevent ourselves from doing that would make the risk go away, these are the things we'll do by avoiding risk. So once we have done this, once we have implemented these risk reduction options, pretty much we will then quantify whatever risk remains, and we call this residual risk. So this, once we quantify this, we then start to identify for those risks that remain, what will be our recovery options for this? If the disaster occurs, how do we then handle this? And we have a lot of suggestions here. Now, these are not really cast in stone. This could be based on different approaches that we would use. So, for example, we could be using ISO 31000 risk management approach to determine what we should do. We could also use ISO 27005 to also determine the approach we should use. And then we'll evaluate all the options and then select the appropriate strategy that the company should go with. So, one of the things we then need to do is create the continuity plans. We create the plans. And one of the things we do first is we create the recovery organization, meaning the continuity organization. And we have to think about the organization that will kick off when the disaster occurs and the organization that will continue to manage the operation. So there are two types of organization we are creating. One is just crisis management, basically. The other one is just a committee that is overseeing continuity within the organization. So, and then we start to create, define, develop, or work with external parties, or like the authorities, or to determine what we should do, because if there's a fire, we might need to involve external authorities, or like the police and so on, and fire people to come and support to address the issues. And then we start to develop continuity plans, and in that we have three sets of plans, or two sets of plans. One is response plans and the other one is recovery plans. And these are the plans that we have to develop before we can say we are ready for a disaster. And then we develop procedures to support this, and then we develop a schedule for maintaining disaster readiness. And initially, once we develop the schedules, we start to test the continuity plans and the recovery plans to ensure that they work. Once we do all those, one of the things we are doing, which is actually would have been part of the things we'll have done from the beginning, is training and awareness. So what we've done is we've shown here a timeline for the kinds of training that we will conduct. So at the beginning of the project, we might teach people on how to manage projects because we're doing this in form of projects. We might also conduct an executive awareness similar to what we're doing today to the company's executives to let them understand the business continuity approach we're going to be following and what the deliverables will be and what our approach will be. So these are the things we're going to be presenting to them. And for the stakeholders within the organization, we might take them through a 3-day business continuity essentials kind of course, which again elaborates more on what we have covered for the executives. And for the project team themselves, we will take them through a 5-day course, meaning teach them how to do continuity planning from the beginning, from the start to the end. We will also show them how to establish a business continuity management system based on ISO 22301. And then on the last day, allow them to write a business continuity exam, or basically to become a practitioner in that space. And there could be other training that we might conduct, and as the project progresses, we are also doing ongoing project briefings as the project progresses. So these are the kind of training and awareness that we conduct throughout the project and even after the project is completed. One of the things we said we are going to be doing is exercising. And when we say exercise, at times people confuse it with testing. So exercising means providing people the opportunity to practice whatever has been documented in the continuity plans. Whereas testing means that we want to check that the plans are correct and feasible. And in this case, we might also be thinking about technology devices, testing that a technology device like a server can be restored, or a computer will come up, and so on and so forth. A backup can be restored, and so on. So testing would usually come up with a pass or fail, whereas exercising would just be allowing people to practice the contents of the plan. Once the disaster occurs, then this is our approach to restoring operations. One of the things that has to be done first is to decide whether to invoke the continuity plans. And the procedure for doing this will have been established, will have been communicated to the crisis management team that will make that call. And they might have moved to, part of the things that will happen is they might move to an emergency operations center or a command center. And that is where they are providing all the communications once we decide to invoke the disaster. And then they will just continue to monitor the restoration of the different processes and services, and we record activities as the recovery operations are taking place. And then at some times we might return to the original site where the disaster occurred, or sometimes we might use the current site as the site that we are going to be operating from going forward. And that will be a business decision. But it ends up by saying we are returning to normal operation, and that would be the end of the invocation procedure. So in wrap up, basically to wrap up, I want to then introduce you to ISO 22301 2012. Now, this is an international standard, is to enable us establish a business continuity management system whereby we want to start by gathering requirements for business continuity using BIA that I mentioned before and working with interested parties. And we want to follow the Plan, Do, Check Act, Plan, Do, Check Act to ensure that we satisfy all the clauses within the ISO 22301 international standard. Once we do this, then our organization becomes a managed business continuity. That means that we are ready for any disaster to occur. And so what are the contents of the ISO 22301? It has 10 clauses from clause 0 to clause 10. Specifically, clauses 4 to 10 are the clauses that a company must ensure that they are able to satisfy if they want to be ISO 22301 certified. And so what's our approach for implementing a project like that? Usually we use the Plan, Do, Check, Act approach. We start by establishing project governance, conducting initiation, preparing project charter. That's what we start by. And then we go on to assessing what is in place using different approaches that we've developed over time. And then we create a plan. The plan will include a schedule. And part of the things we do in phase 4 is to do training as well as address some of those issues. And then in phases 5 to 8, we basically implement the ISO 22301 2012 clauses in line with our business continuity life cycle. That's how we do them. And then in phase 9, we could then certify the organization to ISO 22301 by doing both internal audits and pre-certification audits. And then once this is done, then we close the project. Now, as we do all this, we are checking and acting by monitoring and measuring the results of each of the steps we are following, reporting and reviewing, and improving as necessary. This is our high-level procedure for doing this. Okay, so, but it's not every organization that wants to establish business continuity management system. Again, BCI did a benchmarking survey basically just to identify what people are saying, what are the challenges to ISO 22301 certification. And 25% are saying they don't want to do this because of resource constraints, maybe budget, it's too costly, it's expensive. 19% are saying it's complex, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to do it. Now you know how to do it. Now you know what to do. At least you can take what we've presented today and use it as a basis to jumpstart the process. And then the last one says top management buy-in. Now, management will only buy in if they understand the loss to the business, if we don't do continuity planning. So one of the things we need to do is demonstrate to management that it's not something that they can defer. It's something that has to happen now. So then what are the top reasons for doing ISO 22301? A lot of companies say because they just want assurance. They just want assurance that their services and products will continue to meet the needs of the marketplace, or they can continue to deliver their products and services. 48% are saying they want to protect their reputation and their brand, basically. So that's what they're saying. And then some other 44% are saying they want to be able to recover quickly when a disaster occurs. So it could be any of those reasons why you are trying to establish a business continuity management system. So it's now 10:44 and I am done. We are now 45 minutes into the presentation, and so I will hand over back to Kevin to take questions. Kevin?
Thank you very much, Joel. Thank you very much, Joel. That was an excellent presentation. Okay, for the audience members on the call, we do have the opportunity to ask questions of Joel Oduko if you have any questions on this particular content. The way to ask questions is please type them into the questions window on your computer interface. Type your questions in there. I will read them out and Shola will address the questions. So just at the bottom screen, please do so now. While we're waiting for questions to be answered in, everybody, you do earn some PDUs for this call, professional development units. If you are a PMI certified project manager and you are looking either CAPM or PMP and you're looking for professional development units for recertification, or if you're a business analyst through the IIBA and you're certified through them and you're looking for recertification credits, please send us an email to info@procept.com, info@procept.com, and ask for the information. We'll send you a one-page flyer that describes exactly what you need to do to claim your credits. But make sure you quote the title of this webinar so that we know exactly which webinar to send you information on. So this is the Disaster Proofing Your Business webinar. Okay, so just waiting for questions to appear within the interface. So one person asked a question specifically about failover, but they're not asking about IT failover, they're asking about business failover. Can you cite some examples of when companies have got it right, that when one location was unavailable for any particular reason, that they had another location able to pick up the slack? What are the best practices in that area?
Thank you, Kevin. Now, it's one of the things that I might not necessarily have a particular example to give now, but one of the things that we do or that is done as part of exercising is to ensure that the critical sites have been identified and we could do some drills to fail over to other sites during a disaster. Once that has been done or practiced over time, then it's going to be easy. So for example, if you're a bank and you have several branches and one of the branches happens to be engulfed in a disaster or in a hard robbery situation or whatever, and people can't access that site, then some communication, your crisis management committee must step in to start to provide communication to the general masses to say, for this particular branch, if anybody wants to do any business with us today or for the next few days, please go to the following other branches. That is the kind of communication that must take place. Now, for this to be meaningful and for it to work, that means that we must have defined the communication mechanisms during the preparation or during the testing, basically, during the exercising. But if we fail to define this, it will not work. Now, one other example I will give is the 9/11. A lot of companies were hit by the 9/11 incident. A few days after, some companies actually came back to life, and I could give you this information about such companies that actually came back to operating in another site after the disaster occurred. Or I could send that to you. If you send me your email, I could reach out to you on that. So that's my summary is that failover requires us to have done some exercising during the planning process, during the creation of business continuity plans. Once the project is done and we're now waiting for disaster to happen, then we should then be ready to be able to use whatever we put in our response plans to respond to a disaster. I hope that answers the questions.
Okay, excellent. There was another question that came in. Let me see if I can read it out here. Are there examples in the standards of how to deal with employee-caused disasters, specifically cyber attacks from an existing employee or a malicious employee causing problems?
Now, the standard does not necessarily provide us with how to avoid this. They don't. The standard allows us, practitioners, to identify all these as potential hazards when we are doing our risk assessment. And then we identify what could be done to address them. And cyber issues is predominant in the whole world right now. And every organization is looking to build firewalls and all those kind of things to prevent this. But what can you really prevent? At times when this thing is coming from a disgruntled employee, how do you manage that? So then what that then means is that it's only what you have done through segregation of duties, through ensuring that not only one person can perform a singular task from beginning to the end. Those are the things that will save us. And through ensuring that even if one employee, which could be an AD, does something stupid, the company can still recover despite what the person has done. So this will require a lot of testing and exercising when the project is being undertaken. But the standard does not specifically say this is what you should do to address that.
Excellent, thank you. I think we're getting closer to the top of the hour. If anybody has a question, please type it into the questions window and we'll read it out. In the meantime, Shola, can you tell us how people can find out more about business management and disaster planning and all of this? Do you have any advice on what next?
Well, one of the things that people can do is go for training. That's one of the things you can do. Is people can go for training to have a better understanding of what continuity planning is all about and how to prepare for continuity. That's one area. And there are bodies out there, including Procept, that provide this training. So there is a Procept. We have 3 types of courses. There's Disaster Recovery Institute, there's Business Continuity Institute. There are so many organizations that can support that. In addition to this, my recommendation is to also join any of those bodies to continue to get updated on business continuity. Now, in the whole world, there is no one defined body that is governing business continuity worldwide. For example, Business Continuity Institute is in UK, but you also have Business Continuity Management Institute somewhere else in the world. And you have Disaster Recovery Institute or International in Canada here. So depending on where you are, you could join the bodies that are closer or closest to you, or even join any of the bodies and continue to receive information or education about business continuity going forward. And you could also sign up for our webinars from time to time on business continuity, or send emails to me if you have any questions in this area.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. We're approaching the top of the hour. Thank you very much, Shola, for an excellent webinar. I learned a lot myself and found it quite engaging. Everybody else, please, you're welcome to join any of our other webinars that we have coming up. We have quite a few scheduled, and they will be continuing throughout the rest of the year and into early next year. So please stay tuned for additional webinars. Our next webinar is coming up in August on August 24th on the ISO 20000 standard, which you might find of interest. And we're booking webinars now on business case development and some others for September and onward. So please stay tuned for our excellent webinar series where you get to find out a little bit about Procept's excellent subject matter experts and instructors and learn a little bit about various topics. This video has been recorded and will be made available on YouTube within a few days. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.